I think it's important to fail, but it's important to fail and make new mistakes. Okay. We exist in a community partly so we can all go to school off of each other, right? I think this is also important that you have to have the right kind of failure. And when you have it, if it's the first time you've tried it and you've looked around and no one else has tried it before, that's probably a good thing because then you can share, you've learned something and that knowledge can be shared then. And that's called progress.
Mm-hmm. Many people think innovation belongs to a select few with the right title, funding, or perfect idea. What if that's not true? Welcome to Innovate Where You Are. I'm Kristy Venne. Each episode, I talk with people across industries, builders, educators, founders, and students who are creating change in real time. We explore the messy side of innovation, the risks, pivots, and lessons behind the work. Because innovation starts with curiosity, takes courage, and begins right where you are. Let's dive in. Today's guest is Dr. John Horack, an aerospace leader, researcher, and strategist whose career has spanned space, industry, and higher education. In this conversation, we explore how big ideas move through complex systems, what it takes to lead innovation through red tape, and why long-term vision still matters in a fast-moving world. Where does innovation feel the hardest and why?
So where does it feel the hardest and why? Innovation is hard. It's the hardest wherever you happen to be at the moment. The beauty is, though, that through some persistence and through struggling, innovation is largely a struggle sometimes to figure out how to do something. It can come from all of those places. It comes from industry. It comes from academia. It comes from the government laboratories and places where we work. It comes while you're in the shower. It comes while you're in the garden. I mean, innovation is something that we're all capable of. It's something that we do often without thinking of it. And sometimes, it's hard, right? It's hard, but it's a hard thing worth doing, as we say here at Ohio State.
Absolutely. And that challenge isn't a bad thing. The friction is productive at times, for sure. We'll probably talk about that a little bit more, but I'm curious, thinking back on your time way back when you were with NASA, and I know you've kind of worked with them since, but what's something about innovation in that kind of environment that most people outside of the space industry just would find surprising? They just wouldn't realize is happening.
Yeah, so when you're doing things like, let's say, flying people into space or building hardware to go into space to learn about the cosmos or to look back at the Earth, you're doing things that are barely at the edge of what people know how to do. And sometimes that manifests itself in pretty difficult ways. We lost 14 astronauts during the shuttle program. We lost 3 on the launch pad during Apollo. And this is because it's hard. And so you're constantly asking the question, how do I make it safer? How do I make it more reliable? Have I thought of everything? Is there something else I could be doing? And so in NASA, you're constantly working that. Von Braun, who was the leader of the Saturn V program, Werner von Braun, the research is what I do when I'm not quite sure exactly what I'm doing. Because if you know exactly what you're doing, then it's not really on the cutting edge. It's not on the bleeding edge. Not needing to constantly remind yourself, how do I make this better? How do I do this work, solve this problem, add value? And so at NASA, that was almost kind of every day was like that. You were trying to figure out how to do something that was at the edge of what people barely know how to do and to do it successfully.
That's so brave. I think a lot of our listeners are probably thinking about their work and thinking, okay, well, I might be on the edge of my industry, but that's very different than that perspective of human life and safety and that being at the forefront of decision-making, truly going where no one's gone before. That's a really, really impactful space. Before your career took off, when you were younger, what first sparked your fascination with space and flight? Was there any specific moment that set you on this path?
Yeah, so I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, where everybody's a Cardinal fan. And a lot of my friends had parents that worked at McDonnell Douglas. And at the time, McDonnell Douglas was the builder of the Gemini space capsule. I was always interested in science, math, space. I can't really remember a time when I said, by golly, that's what I want to do. That happened in a lot of other things I never did get to do. Like, when you watch Ozzie Smith play shortstop, you're like, by golly, that's what I want to do. The answer is no, you're not going to do that. But I was committed to it. And so space has always been this thing. I mean, I think growing up in the late 60s and early 70s, especially when you're forming and we're going to the moon and it's just kind of what we do, You're like, well, that's just kind of where we should be, and I want to be a part of that.
Mhm.
And so it's always been something I wanted to do. I was fortunate to be accepted to go to school at Northwestern University, and from there I got a job at NASA in Huntsville, Alabama. I was there for 30 years in Huntsville working different space jobs, and then came to the Ohio State University in 2016 to be the Neil Armstrong Chair.
That sounds like a dream career path, honestly.
Yeah.
Really, really enviable the things you've gotten to do and see in your career so far.
Yeah, very blessed.
And you're still going, definitely, with your leadership right now.
Yeah,
So
I have a pulse. I'm still going. Good. All right. Thank
going
you for that.
strong. So you've operated at the intersection of science, engineering, public policy. Where do you see the biggest misunderstandings between those worlds? And how have you learned to translate across them? You're really a boundary spanner in what you do.
So that's good. There's a couple things I'll say in response to that, Kristy. And one is that I think, we still seem to think in many ways as a culture that space is like this exotic thing. It's certainly exciting, right? It's certainly cutting edge. It's certainly inspirational. But at the same time, it's become just sort of an intrinsic piece of what it means to be alive in the 2020s. If you can imagine a day without space, it's really not a good thing, right? You can't find your way. We can't communicate like this. I can't use my credit card. People might be interested to realize that every time you use your Wayfinder on your phone or in your car, you're a commercial consumer of general relativity. And that has to do with the fact that Einstein, in the early part of the century, people are like, what's that crazy guy with the weird hairdo doing? What does that have to do with me? And the answer is right now, everything, because the key to GPS is knowing what time it is. And so what we do is we put these very highly precise clocks on satellites that are going around the Earth. And what general relativity tells you is that when you put a clock at a different place in a gravitational well, or if you move it and give it a velocity, depending on where it is and how fast you see it moving, it ticks at a different rate. And so you need to correct all of that for general relativity so that you can land the plane where you want to land it, so that the pizza delivery person delivers the pizza to the proper house. And so we're consumers on a daily basis, without even knowing it, of something as esoteric as general relativity. So space is just a complete utility, foundational platform on which modern society is built. That's one thing that I think I wish I could communicate to everybody, because from that, then we get an understanding of how important it is to maintain, to preserve, protect, and how important all of the research has been since the time of Kepler, right? Kepler's figuring out orbits. People are like, I'm trying not to get the plague. What are you doing? He's like, I'm going to tell you how a satellite operates. They're like, I don't care, but we care. So this research, and I say this a lot, that it's the first link in the value chain of prosperity. And so the work that we're doing today, it could be in cancer, it could be in how we join materials, it could be in spaceflight. These are the things from striped toothpaste to stealth aircraft that were research and are now just stuff that we almost take for granted. And space, in a good way, that has happened to space.
That's fascinating, connecting the dots on why we really need to value the research that's happening. And what you've done for your career has been to translate that between different industries and audiences. And that example of GPS is so helpful to me because I rely on that heavily. I'm a little directionally challenged, but I've never thought about the connection. People often have a very surface level understanding. It's, oh, well, space research, they're sending people to space and it's just to go to space. Or maybe someday we'll have life in outer space and we'll find another home. That's all I hear people, that's as far as they go. And really, you're saying the complexity is so much deeper than that. And the relevance to our everyday lives, it matters and we should value that. And we have to invest in that in order for us to have the quality of life and the future that we want, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, what you're going to see in the future, the International Space Station, I hope all of the folks who are listening or watching get a chance to go outside in their backyard sometime and see the ISS fly over. It's magic. It's a celestial cathedral to human collaboration. And we have only just begun to figure out how to best use the laboratory of spaceflight, the absence of net gravity, microgravity, the hard vacuum, the radiation environment, the challenging supply chain, the stressors, that happen to plants and people and living organisms when you go to space. We're
Mm.
only beginning to figure out how to use that as a laboratory. It turns out that when you remove gravity, you see all these interesting physical, chemical, biological processes that are masked on the ground. They're now helping us understand how crystals form, how we might make more pure semiconductors. People are trying to grow human retinas in space so that you can restore sight to the blind, literally. And in the future, when the ISS is retired and these commercially operated, privately owned space stations with research business models are in space, we're looking to open up a whole new laboratory that I can't build on the ground at any cost to
Mm.
gain insight into these fundamental physical, biological materials and other processes that can help us then improve life on Earth. And it's already happening.
Wow, that's amazing. And it makes me think about how a lot of these types of initiatives unfold not just over months and years, but decades. I mean, these are in long-term investments. How do you keep people with turnover and changes and the world and everything happening? How do you keep them motivated and aligned when the payoff might be in the future? And there's a lot of bureaucracy in large organizations. What's the magic behind that? The glue that holds that together and keeps the alignment moving forward.
If we look, trying to hold people together actually in research isn't that hard because the promise of what you're doing is so exciting. And we're working on things that aren't just sort of like chocolate or vanilla ice cream questions. They're really some of the most foundational, challenging problems or opportunities that we can bring to bear. And it takes a lot of people. There are really I'll say there are no simple problems left in the world. If there were, people would be solving them. And there are very few what I'll call monochromatic, like a pure chemistry or a pure physics or a pure biology problem. It's all of these disciplines now mixed together because the world is so interdependent, complex. And so universities and university research are really well set up to do this because we can bring excellence at scale across all these disciplines, combine them in ways. Universities themselves partner together because no university has everything, but every university has something. And you can bring them together to address questions of how do we cure cancer? How do we ensure that everybody has nutritious food? How do we keep the air clean? We all get old. We all get sick. We all want to be well. We want strong communities. We have to figure out the future, and we got to understand what it means to be human in the world. If those are the 6 or 7 things that we all agree on, universities and university research are amazingly innovative and exciting places to go work on those kinds of things. Morale's not a problem usually when it comes to the problem we're working on.
Sure.
We all have bureaucracy.
Right. Definitely. And speaking about that from the university perspective, and you said even, joining up with other universities, the collaboration against these big human issues, how does that work with the intersection of policy and politics? Because really, it's a machine, the funding streams and support for initiatives. I mean, you're definitely navigating those waters as well, trying to keep things moving forward. How does that play out? How do you manage all of that change?
Yeah, so at a public university like Ohio State, we take that role very, very seriously because we have a very sacred obligation, if you will, to every citizen of Ohio, to every member of the legislature or the executive branch who fortify the work that we do, to the federal agencies and companies that fund the research that we do. And so when we accept $1, let's say from the state budget or from the National Science Foundation or from NASA or from a company that does work with us, we have a very sacred obligation to steward that money, to be accountable for that, and to deliver research results that are of high value for the investment being made through us. I would say that the investments are made through us as much as they are made into us. Now, some things you say, I'm going to invest in Ohio State so that they have the best nuclear reactor on campus for testing and learning. Okay, great. But that then leads directly to an investment through Ohio State to help with understanding how to cure brain tumors, cancerous brain tumors, or how to build new energy systems. These are investments made through us. And so the policy and the research and the technology, they all go hand in hand because that's as I keep using the word sacred, that's the contractual and obligation that we have to our stakeholders. And so we have You have to be very mindful of that. And I kid about the bureaucracy, but part of the bureaucracy is to help provide that accountability, the documentation, the receipts, the compliance with the law, and all of these things. But they go hand in hand. Taxpayer is our stakeholder. And ultimately, if you are a citizen of Ohio, you have the right to expect that the investments made into and through Ohio State benefit you or your children or those who will come after you.
I think our taxpayers definitely would appreciate that answer for sure, to see where their dollars are going. Thinking about innovation, and I know you've done a lot of work around creating environments where other people can be innovative and collaborate. And sometimes that is slowed down, and it can be slowed down by things such as bureaucracy, but also the fears that humans have. Sometimes thinking outside the box or getting comfortable in the ways that we go about doing things, or our methodologies, or limited by certain constraints or other reasons too. What do you see that slows down innovation the most from your lens?
You touched on some of it, fear, but we in the United States actually have less of that than in many other places. Some of our most successful innovators, people who start successful companies or invent new products, they're used to failure because this is the third or the fourth time they've tried something, right? And I harken back to something that Abraham Lincoln said when he was talking about long before he was president or a lawyer, he was invested in basically a grocery store, a dry goods store in Illinois. And it didn't do well. It went out of business. And what he said was about that episode is he said, I made a failure. Not I was a failure, not it failed. This was like his creative act was, ta-da, I made a failure. And he wasn't chagrined by that. He wasn't chagrined by the fact that, he lost the Senate race to Stephen A. Douglas. He wasn't chagrined by the fact that he's a one-time congressman. He just kept going. And ultimately, 16th president of the United States, in my opinion, best we've ever had. Failure does inhibit us, but we're fortunate to live in a culture where maybe it doesn't inhibit us as much as it might inhibit others around the world. And so, we tend to fall off our bicycle because we're learning how to ride it. And we brush off our knees and we put our helmet back on. Hopefully you're wearing a helmet and we get back on. And so I would encourage people, don't be afraid. Be unafraid. Now, don't be reckless, right? But don't be afraid to go out and try something and make a mistake, because in those mistakes are where you're going to learn the most, right? If everything goes great, like, okay, what have you learned? So fear can hold us back, but don't be afraid. Try things. Get in a community. Innovation comes not by isolation. There's this idea that somehow you go back into your lab and you hide yourself and sequester yourself for months or years at a time and ta-da, out you come. I don't actually think it works that way. You probably need some solitude. You probably need some thinking time, but you also need this exchange of energy and information and ideas back and forth so that the spiral of innovation can be moved upwards.
I love that spiral of innovation. There's a lot of energy in that as well. And we have the technology to be very connected with others, thinking locally or globally on the same topics, to find our people who are doing similar things, no matter what industry we're in. It sounds like you have created a really functional relationship with the concept of failing. And I'm guessing that probably comes up, in your own work even. Yeah. Failing, and to me, I agree with everything you said. I align to those same beliefs. There's no failing, there's learning. Learning comes from when things don't go the way we expect or hope. Is that how you view the relationship, how you were talking about President Lincoln, or is it a slightly different approach you take in your own work?
So I think it's important to fail, but it's important to fail and make new mistakes. Okay. We exist in a community partly so we can all go to school off of each other, right? And I can say, Kristy tried these 4 things and they didn't work for her. It's probably not a good idea if John tries exactly the same 4 things in the same way, because I'm going to get the same result. And then I haven't learned anything from you, and you could have told me better, right? So I think this is also important that you have to have the right kind of failure. And when you have it, if it's the first time you've tried it and you've looked around and no one else has tried it before, that's probably a good thing, because then you can share, you've learned something and that knowledge can be shared then. And that's called progress, right? Uh-huh. When we as a community or as an organization not only learn what works, but also learn what doesn't work and then share that, at least for other people's considerations. Now, you may say, well, in this situation, the steps that you took, if I tried it over here, it might work, but the circumstances are different, right? So And then that leads to understanding the context in which you're trying to operate. And on some things, it's okay to get a C, and on some things, you've got to get an A. Now, most people who are innovative and type A and want to go forward, they want to get an A on everything. But that isn't the world. So accept the fact that you're going to get a C on some stuff, figure out what it's okay to get a C on, and get an A on the stuff that really matters.
Well said. Dr. Horack, you've served many high-performing institutions and companies and organizations that aim very high. And I know you support a lot of high performers, like you said, the ones who want to get A's. How do you protect visionary thinking inside these large institutions when there are a lot of haters out there? There are a lot of people that want to poke holes and maybe not support people in moving forward with big ideas. And you have such a positive way about you. What does that look like? How do you protect visionary thinking?
So my mom said that people are like tofu. They taste like what they're cooked with. And I think it's true. I mean, my mom, we could have a whole show on stuff my mom and grandmother used to say.
Love that.
Positivity is kind of a choice, so surrounding yourself with positive people. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram. I don't do a lot of social media because I don't find it enriching. I don't spend my time I try not to. I'm not perfect at it. I try not to spend my time on stuff that doesn't give me energy. Because if I spend my time on stuff that drains me, I got nothing left for anything else. So I try to find positive people. I try to carve out a space in which innovative thinking, positivity, even it's okay to dream every once in a while. Dreams are for people who are awake. And, that's how we get somewhere. So you have to be purposeful about it, I think. And many times in the modern world with all the stuff that's coming at us and 48 emails that have come in since we started the show and text messages, you have to just say, I'll get to that. Right now, I'm concentrating here, and this is where I'm at. I'm going to be present, and I'm going to be present maybe just with myself. But to take away some of that negativity, because you have to realize that most of the people who comment in internet, they're not experts, okay? And certainly the commenting on me, I'm like, you don't even know me. Whatever, okay.
Right.
Put that aside. And put your faith in people who are positive, who you can surround yourself with, who give you energy, and who in the interaction actually lift you up to a place you like to be.
That's beautiful. It actually kind of leads into another question I was curious about, and you sort of answered part of it. Thinking about, the kind of work you do and the leadership that you provide, emotionally what that requires. But I heard you say the self-discipline that you have in order to create your own protective space, in order to be able to be the best version of you, to be able to support others. You're surrounding yourself by positive people. You're intentionally making choices about what you engage in or don't engage in. Sounds like that's a big part of it. Is there anything else that you would add on how you fortify yourself to support others emotionally?
For me, humor is absolutely essential, okay? I usually give out my cell phone number to just about anybody that I work with. I say, if it's important and it's immediate, text me. If it's not important and it's not immediate, but it's funny, text me. Because if we don't have joy in our circumstance, and if we can't figure out how to sort of bloom where we're planted a little bit, it just becomes a slog. And we're dealing with some very serious things, some really hard problems, and they're consequential, right? In many cases, cure for cancer is life and death. I lost my father to cancer. It's not a trivial thing. But to deal with these things, you have to give yourself some grace. You have to give yourself some time. You have to that life is a gift and that you got to make something out of it. And it's not all supposed to be drudgery. It's not all supposed to be eating candy either. But leavening your serious work with a little bit of humor and a little bit of grace and a little bit of humility is always a good thing.
Absolutely. So thinking about, shifting gears a little bit, considering the policy of space and aerospace, that world, and the decisions that you've mentioned, hinted upon this a couple times, that carry tremendous implications for people's lives, for finances. There are national implications as well. These are big, big projects and decisions, high stakes. Can you think about a moment or a situation where you have advocated for or been involved with something with high stakes, and how you process through that and what you learned from that experience that our listeners would be able to benefit from.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want anyone to come away with the impression that, somehow I had the most high pressure job in the government or anything like that. I mean, I never made decisions about armed conflict. I never made decisions about those kinds of things. But you sit in a flight readiness review for the space shuttle as an example, right? And my stuff was in the payload bay, right? So I'm like the person that puts stuff in the payload bay to go, but or in my role at NASA, a certain signing of the payloads that they're ready to go, right? And then you start thinking about, okay, yeah, we're going to put 7 of our friends, moms and dads, sons and daughters, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives in the shuttle, and we're going to send them up the hill with $1 billion worth of hardware. And on a statistical basis, you can argue it's as dangerous as combat. And you're going to do it on purpose. And I have friends that have flown as many as 5 times. And that's pretty serious, right? And so even if you aren't the person that's figuratively pushing the button to light the rocket, right? You're a part of that every day. If you're around the hardware, if you're refurbishing the hardware, it's an awesome responsibility. Now, it's distributed across, tens of thousands of people perhaps. And at the end of the day, it is, maybe the administrator's job or the flight director or the launch director's job to go and say, we're going to fly today. But being a part of that is a very, first, there's a certain honor in being associated with those kinds of things. Secondly, you appreciate the consequences that would come with failure. And so you're really, really mindful about trying to do a good job and make sure that you are doing your part and not necessarily having your head up and looking at everybody else doing their part and neglecting yours. And so head down, working on the piece you can do and making sure that you understand that your output is somebody else's input. And so you better deliver that output to others on your team, as an example, in a way that they find it useful, valuable, and can digest it as input. Otherwise, you wind up with this inability for the team to work together.
And collaboration is so key. In that example you shared, but really across industries, we know that is core to the successful functioning of companies, teams, institutions. It can't be understated, really. I want to take a moment while we have time. You had mentioned a little bit about the amazing advances that are happening research in space. And I'd love for you to teach our listeners a little bit about Starlab and explain what Starlab is, the purpose, and what's happening right now.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that the International Space Station will be coming to an end 2030 or 2032. And since November of 2000, 24/7, 365, we've had at least one American in orbit the whole time. So anybody who's 25 years old or younger has never taken a breath in their life when we haven't had an American in orbit. And that's a very different world than I grew up in, where every, couple times a year for 6 days or 10 days, we'd send 2 astronauts up in Mercury program or what have you. We go to the moon and then they come back and then there's nothing going on until the next mission. And what that has done is not only in the sense of we now live and work in space. Space is a place that humans call home, and we don't want to stop that, even though the International Space Station, like I said, it's a 30-year-old piece of hardware. It's getting hard to maintain. It's getting expensive. So what we will be doing is we, the United States, will be replacing the ISS with a range of privately owned, commercially operated space stations. One candidate for that is called Starlab. It's being built primarily by a company that is a consortium joint venture led by Voyager Technologies here in the United States, but also Airbus from Germany, Mitsubishi Corporation from Japan, MDA from Canada. You don't know MDA perhaps, but you know the robot arm on the shuttle and the robot arms on the station. That's MDA. Hilton Hotels is a partner. And also Ohio State University. The Ohio State University is the lead university in the partnership. So I had a chance to help write the original proposal for Starlab to NASA to get the seed money going into the economy to begin to develop this station. It will hold 4 people, 24/7, 365, scheduled for launch in early 2029 on a Starship launch vehicle. The ISS took 42 launches to assemble in space. 42. Starlab will be ready in one launch. Comes off the rocket, it's ready to go.
Oh my gosh.
And because of that, you can envision a future in which you build multiple copies, put them in different orbits, different uses, so on and so forth. So we're doing two things right now at Ohio State. First, we're helping fortify that hardware. It's reached and passed now what's called the critical design review. So basically the design is set. We understand all the gazintas and gazoutas and where stuff's going to be and how we're going to build it. And we're going
Technical
forward.
terms.
Yes, exactly. A gazinta is a thing that goes into, and a gazata is the thing that comes
There we
out.
go.
And then the second piece, which I think is equally as exciting as the hardware that will be going around, is that spaceflight is a lot like when you go to a Broadway play, right? You go to a Broadway play, maybe it's Phantom of the Opera at the Majestic, and the singing is great, and the costumes are awesome, and the lighting is cool, and Raoul is this shady dude, and Christine's voice is amazing. That's what you get when you're in space. But what you don't see when you go to the Broadway shows, you don't see where they built the set. You don't see where they sewed the costumes, where they had rehearsal, where the director was screaming, no, do it this way. And where did they sell the tickets and the playbills and all this other stuff? This all goes on the ground in space. And here at Ohio State, we're working with Voyager to establish the Vista Science Park. It'll be at the north side of the Ohio State University Airport, up to 80 acres of space research, hardware development, maybe payload operations, running the mission, all here in Columbus, networked with a series of similar research parks around the world that will build this ecosystem to support everything that's going on up there with the groundwork necessary. There's at least 50 times as much work on the ground. Like for every hour of stuff in space, at least 50 times as much work going on the ground, just because that's really the tip of the spear. I mean, you can think about it. How many people work at NASA? 25,000. How many astronauts are there? 100. Okay. Round numbers. And so most of the workforce that supports NASA doesn't actually go into space. And therefore, most of the work that gets done in support of space research will be done here on the ground, and a lot of it at Ohio State. And back to what I talked about before, if you really want to build a privately owned, commercially operated space station with a research business plan, you got to immerse it in a research context. And for better or worse, NASA centers, they aren't always very research culture. Their operations mission culture, they're behind big gates. It's hard to get on a NASA center, especially nowadays. Universities have a much more collaborative, open sharing, team-oriented environment to support that. And that's what we're trying to do here in Ohio.
That's amazing. Thinking about that collaborative atmosphere that you're working in, is that something that makes it easier with funding to get support, because it's truly a lot of entities working toward a common cause? You mentioned some really big partners that are a part of Starlab. It sounds like there's a lot of support for what's happening, and it is more public, a little bit more maybe transparent. It sounds like with a university such as Ohio State being that main research partner at the university level, there's probably, I imagine, not my world, but I'm imagining that helps to support and sustain something like that. Is that accurate, would you say?
Yeah, I would say that when you embark upon an endeavor and you can put more good reasons behind that endeavor, you will garner a greater network of support and engagement. And so, if this was a space station to just figure out, how to create better paint on cars, well, no one's going to, I mean, somebody will care, but not a lot of people.
Right.
But when you can bring a laboratory to bear in which you can do material science and biotechnology and plant growth and human health and performance and astronomy, then you create a community under which helps support this, and from which that community is extracting value from the goings on.
There's so much transferable value to so many parts of our lives. All the things you mentioned, I can see there being just such a ripple effect with that research that's being done to improve human life. It's an easy cause to get behind.
Yeah, the work that we do, doesn't just impact, let's say, the scientist when she discovers something. Of course, she's super happy. But the work that we do, and even education is this way. When someone graduates from Ohio State and they walk across the stage and they get their thing and they got their little gown on, their hat, it's a generational transformation. It transforms them, their children, their grandchildren, the state of Ohio. And so we really are doing research that's on a much longer return on investment cycle than, let's say, the next 90 days of the profit and loss statement of the company. Back to Kepler, right? If you had told him that in the future, there would be so many things flying around the Earth at these speeds that we astronomers are complaining they can't see the sky, he'd have been like, you gotta be kidding me. What's a satellite? Oh, that thing that flies. Okay, and it obeys Kepler's laws. How many are there? What? I think he would have been flabbergasted. So in
Absolutely.
that same way, we probably would be flabbergasted if we could live 400 years into the future to see the impacts of what we're doing today. But we know it's there. We know it's there. And back to what inspires you. Well, to make some small contribution to humanity or to society or to technology or improving people's quality of lives that will be sustained for centuries. That's the work that we're in.
Wow. That is so impactful. OSU grad several times over. I feel like I've felt that effect that, being a part of an organization like Ohio State University, it does have a ripple effect. It is something that is amazingly important. And for generations, it's impacted my life, but then all those that I've been able to reach, and hopefully you will be able to reach through this discussion we're having today. I have one more question for you, and then we'll do a couple rapid fires before we wrap up.
Okay.
For someone who's listening and they are a part of a large organization and maybe they feel stuck, they feel like I'm just not making a difference. I don't know how to innovate from where I am in my role. What would be some advice that maybe you could offer them to move forward?
Say yes to the next few things that are asked of you. I've found that being able to say yes to a lot of stuff, even if it's a little scary, a little uncertain, it seems a little outside the channel that I'm in now. Being able to say yes to something is important. And then when you say yes to it, give it your all. If no one's asking you, raise your hand. We all look around in the world we live in the organizations where we're at, the homes we live in, the families we're in, we see things that we think could be made better. Offer, try. Say, hey, I'd like to give this a shot. What do you think, right? And show up. Don't put yourself outside the circle when the discussion's going on. You got to be polite and appropriate and everything else, but insert yourself into that discussion in a professional way and get your ideas out there. I would say that most ideas that any group of people have, number one, there isn't a whole lot of difference between the ideas, let's say, that you would have and I would have in terms of their quality. They may be very different in their approach, in their texture, but especially in the beginning, how do you assess the quality of the idea until you test it, right? And so all ideas are kind of worth looking at some level. And so put your ideas out there. And the way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas and throw out the bad ones. So those are three things. Say yes. If no one's asking, raise your hand to volunteer and say, I'd like to try something. And then when those discussions are going on, participate in them and share. It's really hard. Dynamics of conversations and one person who does all the talking but you gotta try to break that cycle and get to a more healthy dynamic of turn taking in the conversations, getting different ideas in the table. And then when you pick one, go with it and try to make it a success and learn if it's not.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Be brave. It all starts with having the courage and wanting to make change, and then putting yourself out there. That's such solid advice. I want to move on to rapid fires, but I also want to start the first one. I want to know someone who inspires you. And I will add that I don't want to make you blush, but you're a person who inspires me. I think many people listening to this conversation will understand why. You've shared some amazing insights so far, but who is a scientist, a leader, an author, someone right now or recently who has inspired you in your work?
So a few. I mentioned Abraham Lincoln. I mean, I'm a student of Lincoln, especially because of how he writes. Not as much. I mean, was he a great president? Of course he was. Did he have a really hard job? Yeah. So days when we think we got a hard job, I'm like, I'm not trying to save the Union in the middle of the Civil War. Okay. But his mind is amazing. And you think about, he never saw a computer. Somebody asked him, what do you think about school busing? He says, what's a school bus? Right, he never saw any of that, right? All these policy things, right? That guy's mind is fascinating, and you get to learn his mind by reading his writing. So that's an athlete I never got to saw play. Dan Musial. I mentioned I'm from St. Louis at one part. Musial was, and I think I probably am more admiring of him because I never saw him play. Was he a great ball player? Oh yeah. Was he a great human being? Oh yeah. Did he take out part of the middle of his career and go serve in the military? Yeah. Was he a citizen? Absolutely. I'm a fan of the poet Carl Sandburg. I read Langston Hughes. I think he's an amazing writer. I mean, it just, and then some music that I like that no one would ever know of. Heroes are everywhere, but you got to be mindful that you may find that parts of your hero's feet are made of clay. So just know that none of them are perfect, but many of them are examples worth following.
That's awesome. You named a lot of people. Some I don't know that I need to check out, but definitely the athlete is not someone that I'd heard of. But he
Jay
sounds
Farrar
like
and Brian Henneman, two musicians. Go look them up.
I'll look them up. Check it out online. One last question. What excites you most about the future?
That it's going to happen. Seriously.
Okay.
Every day that we live, we get to live in the future, and it's not without problems. The present is not without problems. But we, either individually or collectively, and I think both, have some power over what that's going to be like. And the future that we will live in is partly a product of our own creation of our human hands and our human mind. I hope that my contributions bend that arc a little bit, as Lincoln said, more towards the better angels of our nature, in a world where everybody has greater opportunity, in a world where everybody is healthier, in a world where everybody maybe worries a little less and lives a little more. But that's part of the reason why we're here. I mean, imagine being Jonas Salk and finding the cure for polio and what that means for the future. I mean, we don't have people in iron lungs anymore. Thank you. What an amazing click of the ratchet that improved the future life for so many people. We all have that power, and that does excite me about the future.
Well, Dr. John Horack, I am positive that your leadership and research is definitely going to lead us in the right direction, and that you are going to make an impact, a lasting impact. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. And I can't thank you enough for the contributions that you've made to our society.
It's a joy to be here. Thanks for spending some time with me. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Innovate Where You Are. Check the show notes for links and resources from today's conversation. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that at buymeacoffee.com/Kristy Venne. Until next time.